Hi everyone, welcome to Sports Insider. I am Dan Labbe. He, of course, is Chris Fedor. We've got a packed show for you today. We're going to talk to Mary Kay Cabot about the hiring of Hue Jackson, who might be next now for the Browns as they look for their GM. We'll also talk to Chris Haynes. The Cavs play San Antonio tonight, probably their biggest matchup since Christmas. And, of course, they have the Warriors coming up, so we're going to talk about that as well. And then Zack Meisel will join us as well to talk about his conversation with Mark Shapiro, a little Indians baseball, but let's get right to it. Hue Jackson is the new head coach of the Cleveland Browns. We bring in our Browns beat reporter Mary Kay Cabot to talk about it. Mary Kay, how are you?
I'm doing great, guys. How you doing?
Doing well, Mary Kay. The press conference last night, look, lots of guys have come in here and won press conferences and not won games. What did you think of Hue Jackson last night?
Well, the reason why I think this will be different is because, first of all, he's got that first year of head coaching out of the way. I think all coaches underestimate that first year as a rookie head coach. They don't understand the media demands. They don't understand getting pulled in 25,000 different directions. They make quarterback mistakes. They do a lot of things wrong. I think he got some of the kinks out in his first job with the Raiders. It was a stressful job for him during a stressful time with Al Davis dying and him having to take on a lot more responsibility and things like that. So, he made some mistakes. I think he said, some things. We've probably all seen those quotes where he said he was mad at his team. He learned the power of his words. Although I will say that 2011 was even different than 2016 in terms of Twitter and media. So he will find out that things move even a little bit more fast and furious than they did in 2011. But he has the experience, and he's got the AFC North under his belt, 9 years in this division.
Mary Kay, if you think about the coaching search and the other teams that were attached to Hue Jackson, now those other teams didn't make an offer, but they showed some interest. San Francisco, the New York Giants wanted to interview him. The Browns didn't allow that to happen. Given the competition that the Browns had for Hue Jackson, are you surprised that he took this job?
Well, no, I'm not surprised that he took the job for a number of reasons. I knew he really liked the job right from the start. I knew he was very interested in it. Again, he loves the AFC North. He knows the division. He feels comfortable here. But then also the 49ers interviewed him, and then that was it. They stopped pursuing him a couple of days before the Browns hired him. So they were kind of out of the mix. And then the Giants, I think it started to become pretty clear that they really liked Ben McAdoo, although they were serious about Hue Jackson. He knew that he was going up there and competing with some of the other guys that they really, really liked. Whereas with the Browns, he knew that at that point he had become their number one choice. And it was basically a situation of he's ready to coach, he wants to get back into it, and this was the sure thing.
Mary Kay, he paid lip service to the analytics side of things and, Sashi Brown, Paul DePodesta, Jimmy Haslam, but at the same time, Hue Jackson sounded like a guy yesterday that if he's going to go down this time around, it's going to be on his terms. He sounded like a guy who believes he has a fair amount of power. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's hard to say how much power you're going to have when you don't have say over the roster. Mm-hmm. It's all, just kind of rhetoric until you actually get into it and see what the deal is. But I would have to think that, that he's going to have a huge influence on who they take at quarterback. I mean, if he doesn't like a certain quarterback, they're not going to pick that guy. They just put their time, investment, and money into Hue Jackson, and they're going to give him an opportunity to at least have a humongous say in who his quarterback is going to be. And he knows that position. So they can trust him to do that. Now, when it comes to, picking the next great pass rusher or cornerback, maybe he won't have as large of a voice in that. But I don't think he necessarily cares about that. If he feels as though he needs a cornerback, I'm sure that he trusts the talent evaluators to go get him one. So I think, there will be give and take. They'll all work together. I think he's very, very open to the whole analytics side of it. And he has shown that he's an innovator with the way he runs his offense. So I think he'll be on board.
Mary Kay, obviously the next steps, the Browns have a lot of work still to do. Got to find a defensive coordinator, got to find an offensive coordinator, got to find somebody who's going to be in charge of personnel. When it comes to that in particular, the guy in charge of personnel, what kinds of challenges do you think the Browns are going to run into here given the structure that they have in place?
Well, I've talked to a number of NFL executives already who are not going to let their guys come and interview this job. They're not going to let them walk out the door for basically what is considered by some to be a lateral move. If you're not getting the promotion to GM where you have final say over the 53-man roster, then some of these guys just aren't going to get the chance. And if they do get the chance, then these teams are willing to let them go for a reason, that they're not being groomed for their own GM job there or something. So I do think that it presents challenges by not giving this guy the power. If you had that available to this GM, there would be amazing GMs, lined up outside the door to come and take this job. But they might, and they'll get somebody good, but they won't attract the top-notch candidates.
So, Mary Kay, are you saying essentially that their best chance might be somebody who's currently not in a position right now with another NFL team, somebody who was fired recently? Maybe he's on TV, maybe he's on the radio, but he has that GM experience in his background. He's just not with a team right now?
Well, that could be. It could be somebody like that. I mean, ESPN reported that they're going to talk to Martin Mayhew, who was fired by the Lions in the middle of the season after they got off to a 1-7 start. And then they will probably look internally at some of their guys. Chisholm Opara has been with the team for a long, long time. He's very, very well respected for his ability to evaluate talent. So he's somebody that I'm sure will get strong consideration from the team. Phil Savage, who may have initially hired him, former Browns GM, tweeted out this morning that he'll get some attention internally. And then, I'm just going to spend a lot of the day today calling around and trying to find other guys that they are interested in and looking at. And we were so busy with the coaching search that I just wasn't able to turn my attention yet to kind of trying to figure out exactly who they're bringing in here. But a bunch of names will surface over the next few days, and they'll come up with somebody good. But in terms of, the best of the best in GMs that we've ever heard of, those guys probably are not going to take this job.
Mary Kay, last question before we let you go. Hue Jackson has had Joe Flacco, Carson Palmer, Andy Dalton. Now Johnny Manziel, one of those guys is not like the other. Is this the end for Johnny?
I definitely think that it's the end for Johnny, and I think even before Hue walked in the door, the Browns were at the end of their rope. I wrote yesterday that they gave him the cold shoulder on getaway day. They just really didn't have much use for him. They were very angry about what happened over the weekend. They couldn't get a hold of him that whole day Sunday. He brought more embarrassment to the organization, and they know they can't trust him right now. And I think they'll either move on or at least just put him on the back burner and let him try to get himself together.
All right, Mary Kay Cabot, our Browns beat reporter. Thanks for the time, Mary Kay.
Thank you, guys.
Chris, I think the overarching feeling amongst Browns fans is Hue Jackson, whether he was number 1 on their list, number 2 on their list. He's a guy they wanted. He's a guy other teams wanted. Completely different hire than what we saw in Rob Chudzinski and Mike Pettin.
Yeah, and you know what, Dan? Sometimes it is about that perception.
Yeah.
The fact that the Browns didn't settle for their number 6 guy on the list, number 7 guy on the list. And I think the fact that he was coveted by other teams, that was a draw. Because if you remember at the time that they hired Rob Chudzinski, heck, go back to Pat Shurmur. When they hired Pat Shurmur, did anybody else interview Pat Shurmur except for the Browns? Not that I remember. Rob Chudzinski, did he have a lot of interest around the NFL besides the Browns? No. Mike Pettin, same thing. When you have a guy like Hue Jackson attached to San Francisco, the New York Giants, maybe even Philadelphia tried to get in there late, as a fan base, you can be like, wait a minute, that guy was wanted by those other teams, and he chose us. That's a really, really good feeling. So kudos to the Browns.
Yeah, and let's be honest, the Giants have a quarterback. They play in a weak division. That's a very winnable division.
Yep.
So the fact that he didn't even take that interview, that says something, whether it's that the Browns offered him a ton of money or that he really does like this organization. It says something about this hire. All right, let's switch gears and talk Cavaliers. They are in San Antonio tonight to take on the Spurs. Then they have Golden State after they play Houston to finish up this Texas triangle. Let's bring in our Cavaliers beat reporter, Chris Haynes. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Anytime, guys.
All right, Chris, Cavs Spurs. This is a pretty big test for this Cavaliers team, especially because the Spurs bring a lot of size. Of course, they have a lot of skill on the perimeter. What are you expecting from this team tonight?
Yeah, it's really going to challenge their defensive discipline. I'm talking about the Cavs because the Spurs, similar to the Cavs, they have a versatile roster to where they can play big, but also they can play small and stretch the floor out and really get the Cavaliers defense moving from side to side, and it will be interesting to see which offense can play efficient basketball and wear the defense out, because this is a versatile roster in the Spurs, and with Pop, they do everything so well. You know, they don't make many mistakes. And so the mistakes that they do make from time to time, the Cavaliers are going to have to make sure they capitalize on those. It should be a really interesting game, and it's going to be a contrast in styles in some fashion.
Chris, earlier this morning, I was listening to Kyrie Irving on the Adrian Wojnarowski podcast, and he said something about tonight's game against San Antonio that stuck with me. He said, San Antonio is at a different place than we are right now. What do you think he meant by that?
In a different place?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, you know, I haven't spoke to Kai and I haven't listened to the podcast, but maybe just the window of opportunity, maybe. You know, the Spurs, even though they brought on David West and LaMarcus Aldridge, they probably have, man, this may be their final window right here. When you think about Duncan and Parker, how they're aging. Kawhi is definitely rising. LaMarcus definitely still has a couple of prime years left, but the deep core of that team is pretty old. So maybe he's talking about from that standpoint. You look at the Cavs roster, you can say they probably have a three-year window to get it done. So not having listened to or spoken with Kai, that's probably the best synopsis I can come up with right now.
For the Cavs, Chris, if they don't feel like they're playing their best basketball yet, that their best basketball is still ahead of them, what do you think is the next step for them? What do you think that step is that they want to get to where they're going to feel like they are playing their best?
Well, Kai's still not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so obviously, yeah, I think that's true. That's safe to say. You know, Kai, when he returns to all-star form and then they get some games under their belt, that's when they're going to be at their best. Now, we don't know what that their best is, but, you know, just based off of, you know, how Kai's playing and Shump still, you know, these guys relatively new back in the scheme of things. So, yeah, of course they got some gelling to do. They got some things to mesh together, and Coach Black still hasn't put out all of his offensive and defensive packages yet because those guys have been out for a long period of time. So, yeah, there's no doubt about it. If they continue to stay healthy and stay together, yeah, they're going to get better. We just don't know what that peak is.
Chris, is it possible that the San Antonio Spurs at 34-6 with a point differential of plus 14, is it possible that they're actually flying under the radar a little bit?
They always do, though. You know, that's them. They always do. We always, at the end of the day, you know, you think about the fancy teams, the flashy teams, and then at the postseason, especially in the Western Conference Finals, who are the opponents? Most times it's the San Antonio Spurs. That's how they want to go. They want to go about business that way. 34-6 record, man, that's ridiculous. If the Warriors weren't getting all of this praise for what they've been doing, you know, Spurs will still get left out and shut out. But that's what makes them so sneaky good, is that you know, most teams, they don't have the luxury of winning games and then not being in the limelight. The Spurs, they do it so well, and you have to be aware of those type of teams, man. It's going. I'm expecting a special game. I'm expecting special performances from key players. This should be a really good test for the Cavaliers.
Beyond the final score, what is it you want to see from the Cavs in this matchup against San Antonio?
I want to see something similar to what they pulled off in Dallas, meaning they persevered, they fought, they clawed, they handled adversity, and they came away with the win. Now, to do something like that against this team, in this environment, that would be something. That would be something truly amazing. You want to see that fight and claw. You want to see if they can do that against the supreme teams and not just the middle of the tier teams. So that's what I'm looking for.
Chris, real quickly before you let you go, let's turn ahead to that Warriors game in Cleveland. It'll be the rematch of that Christmas Day game. Do you feel like both teams kind of have that one circled? Because it seems like obviously the Cavaliers want to prove they can beat the Warriors, but the Warriors, I think, too, you know, a lot of people made the excuses that the Cavaliers weren't healthy last year. Do you think both teams have that one circled?
Well, it's kind of hard to have it circled when they had this, you know, they got this crazy Texas triangle to go through. Obviously, I do believe they know the Warriors are up next after this. But, God, that's when you got the Dallas Mavericks, Houston Rockets, and San Antonio Spurs, going up against you in the immediate future, it's kind of tough to have that circle because then it's like, damn, I think they're looking at it like, damn, we got to see them again, like so soon after this. I think it's more so that than, hey, we got that circle, let's get them. This has been a really tough road trip, a really tough stretch of games for this Cavs. I think they're going to have it circled if they meet in the finals. That game right there, it just that Warriors game I'm talking about, it's just coming at a bad time.
I can take you into the locker room and the post-game press conference for David Blatt after the Warriors game right now, Chris. I know exactly what he's going to say if the Cavs lose against Golden State or if they win against Golden State.
Already know.
You know what it's going to be.
Know.
This was the first game after a long road trip. We had just played 6 games in like 14 days. What do you really expect from us?
There you go. You know Blatt so well.
I do.
I'll let him know today that you said that.
All right, Chris, appreciate the time.
All right, take care, guys.
Chris Haynes, our Cavaliers beat reporter. What are you watching for tonight, aside from the final score? What do you want to see?
I want to, it's so weird when watching the Cavs now because everything that I'm paying attention to is beyond the final score. I'm looking to see, do the Cavs have a lineup that I feel like, if these two teams were to meet in June, do they have a 5-man lineup that can play a majority of the game that can hang with San Antonio's lineup? That's what I'm looking for, and that's what I'm going to look for on Monday night when the Cavs play against Golden State. Because what happens in the regular season, sure, it matters, and it gives you some kind of indication of what's going to happen if these two teams met in the playoffs. But when you get into a 7-game series, it's about adjusting, it's about exploiting weaknesses and highlighting strengths, and you've got to be able to have some 5-man lineup that can counter whatever the other team is going to do. And I felt like in the NBA Finals last year, the Cavs had no answer for Golden State's 5-man lineup, their death lineup. They went small, and the Cavs had no counter. I just want to make sure that the Cavs, if they're going to compete for a championship, they have to have an answer for every team that they play. They have to be able to go big, go small, play fast, play slow. And I want to see that tonight.
That line from Kyrie in that podcast stood out to me too, by the way.
Right.
Especially because there was really no explanation.
Yeah, there wasn't.
Follow-up to it. I'm very curious to see if anybody will ask him about that here in the next day or two. All right, let's go ahead and talk some Indians baseball and, of course, some Mark Shapiro with Zack Meisel. He joins us. Zack, how are you doing?
Not too bad, guys. How are you?
Doing well, and of course you can check out Zack's conversation with Mark Shapiro at cleveland.com/tribe. Zack, in talking to Mark, look, he's never really going to give you much on the record, but how do you feel he views his legacy with the Indians?
Well, I think there's a reason why when you ask him that question, he says that he doesn't really think about it, and that he focuses on a great season that the Indians had in 2007, which was almost 9 years ago, and he talks about the relationships he built, and the Indians, hey, give him credit for somehow, some way, there have been so many people in that front office who have gone on to get prominent front office roles elsewhere. So he focuses on those kinds of things, and I think there's a reason he does that. Because if you've spent 24 years in any place, it's pretty hard to believe that you haven't thought about what your legacy is in that city when you finally move on. So, I don't know for sure, but I think this is his way to kind of evade that answer by focusing on some other things that he is proud of.
Zack, whether it's fair or not, I feel like the view of Mark Shapiro in this city is a lot different than the view of Mark Shapiro around Major League Baseball. Do you believe that that is the case? And why do you think Shapiro is looked at in such a positive way when you talk to people around the bigs? Well,
I think for anyone in, it seems, maybe any job in the world these days, to stay in one position with one company for 24 years is pretty remarkable. Now, saying that, the Dolans don't exactly hire and fire guys like the Browns do, and it's not like the front office has had a whole lot of turnover. So it's a little less incredible that Shapiro lasted 24 years in Cleveland and could have lasted as long as he wanted, probably. But he does have respect around the league, and I mean, case in point, the Toronto Blue Jays, who are a very competent team and won the American League East last year, made the ALCS, they tabbed him as the guy. So he's dealt with a tough situation because the Indians haven't had much of a payroll since the Dolans took over. And they've had mixed results, but I think just the way he oversees an operation, this is me speaking for what I think the rest of the league views him as, I think he's succeeded in some ways at that. And I guess he's just got really good knowledge. And I will say this, he's good at building relationships. He's good at communication with other league executives. And he's got a lot of friends around the league.
Zach, you didn't seem to want much to do with your question about whether the Browns offered him the position that eventually went to Paul DePodesta either. Again, did you get a sense, though, from him that maybe that did happen?
I don't know if he ever officially got a job offer from Jimmy Haslam, but I do sense that they wanted his expertise, they wanted his input. And this kind of goes back to your last question. I mean, the teams are turning to him to ask, okay, how do we put together a front office or an organization that's going to be on the right track to put together a team on the field that we want. And so he worked with Alex Shiner, he worked with Sashi Brown, and again, I don't know if there was ever an official offer made, but it sounded like they enjoyed working together, and it a lot depends on the timing too, because Shapiro was pretty much dead set on going to Toronto by the middle of the summer, by June or July. So it would be interesting to know from Jimmy Haslam when did this all go down? When did he want to talk to Shapiro? When would he have offered him a job if he did?
You've had numerous conversations with Mark Shapiro. For a number of years, Zach, he's been linked to the MLB commissioner if that ever becomes available again for him. And now you have reports about maybe an NFL team wanting him to be a part in some way, some kind of capacity. What do you think is next for Shapiro after this Toronto thing? Could you see him maybe making a switch?
Yeah, I mean, you wonder what's left for him because he was president in Cleveland. He presided over the business and the baseball operation. And now in Toronto, he's got all the power. He's got autonomy over there. He's the CEO. He's the president. He's the one that handpicked the general manager, and he's the one that's going to be in charge of everything they do in all facets of the organization. So what is left? I mean, he spent 24 years in Cleveland. I don't know that he's going to want to spend 24 years in Toronto. And you ask yourself that question, and it's okay. You could try your hand at a different sport, and maybe the NFL comes calling somehow. And don't think that Paul DePodesta, who worked under Shapiro in Cleveland, getting that job is a coincidence. I mean, there are ties there, and you can ask yourself, did Shapiro recommend DePodesta? I think that's a good question if Jimmy Haslam ever opened up about this kind of stuff. But, I mean, I think something like league-wide for Shapiro or something in a different organization would seem to make sense. And Shapiro's a guy that he says he doesn't really look too far into the future, but I think once you get to these kind of positions and you're moving up, I think you do ask yourself, what's left for me to accomplish, aside
Zach,
from winning a World Series.
Yeah.
Zach, a real quick baseball question before we let you go. The Indians, of course, they've added Mike Napoli and they've added, a couple other guys, maybe have their eyes on some other guys. But the more I think about this team and how they've been built around this core of guys like Jason Kipnis, Yan Gomes, Michael Brantley, those guys haven't really had a ton of pressure on themselves to perform. But is this kind of the year when people look at those guys and say, look, if this team is going to do anything, it's going to be on you guys?
Yeah, I mean, you could look at it and say, okay, they've done a really good job of laying the foundation. And they've signed all these guys, Kluber and Carrasco and Brantley and Gomes and Kipnis, to long-term contracts, and they're not making a ton of money right now. So it's kind of in the perfect position if you're the Indians, if they had the money to add other people, which I don't think the Dolans are going to spend much more than they already have. So it is up to those guys to say, I mean, this is what you have, and there's a reason why we made you the core players, and now you have to perform and you have to produce and prove that we were right in locking you up to these extensions and pegging you guys as really the leaders of the franchise. And you're right, we haven't seen them do that. They had the pressure of lofty expectations last year, and they crumbled early on, and they had to play catch-up after that. So it'll be interesting to see because I think there's going to be a little bit of pressure with Michael Brantley out. Can this offense back up the starting rotation and the pitching staff? And so I think if they get off to another slow start and it's another year like the ones we've seen recently where they're behind the eight ball from the get-go, I think you're going to ask yourself, can these guys handle it?
All right, Zack Meisel joining us. Go read his story, his interview with Mark Shapiro, part of his Thursday Conversation series that you're going to start seeing every Thursday. Cleveland.com/tribe is his first one. Look, no matter what you think of Shapiro, he's probably one of the most prominent people in Cleveland sports over the last 25 years. Thanks for the time, Zack.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and a guy whose legacy we're also still trying to figure out.
One of the least prominent people over the same time frame. Well, thanks, guys. New Browns head coach Hue Jackson has called Sashi Brown and Paul DePodesta two of the brightest minds in football, even though one's expertise is law and the other's is analytics. He talked about there being no feeling quite like walking through the doors of Berea. He gave a symbolic fist bump to the dog pound and said he couldn't wait for reason to jump into it and celebrate with Browns fans. You know, Jimmy Haslam has changed football coaches about as frequently as some people trade out toothbrushes, yet Jackson said he's confident he can be the guy to turn things around here and live happily ever after. How did all that play with Browns fans? I'm not sure. I know it played well with the media, but let's take a look. Based on my sketchy analytics, we may finally have reached the tipping point where skepticism at least weighs as much as enthusiasm following a new head coach press conference. Says God lost, trucks carrying 3 years worth of Kool-Aid have arrived in Berea. Drink up. Jackson had little support as a first-time head coach in Oakland. His owner, Al Davis, died during that 8-8 season. He seems to welcome the support system he will inherit here in Cleveland. Of course, what's viewed as support in January in the NFL has a tendency to be seen as interference when seasons start falling apart. Our next commenter says Jackson will be fired in, 3 or 4 years. You could argue that's a prediction of stability, given the fact that Rob Chudzinski lasted 1 and Mike Pettin lasted 2. It's reasonable, at least, to suggest Jimmy Haslam will change coaches before he changes the structure of the organization this time. So Sashi Brown and Paul DePodesta probably have a little more job security. But that's standard operating procedure for head coaches in the NFL. And Jackson knows he must win eventually. Sooner than later would be good, though Haslam has more reason to be invested in this hire than he did the previous 2. In his press conference, Jackson came off as passionate, confident, and willing to work with others. Surely that must play well with Browns fans. Yes, our next commenter says, Jackson sounds like the other 674 head coaches who came through Berea in the last 10 years. And that number may be slightly inflated. I believe it's been 674 coaches in 8 years. Surely someone out there feels better about this hire than the other hires that they've had recently. Jackson has experience. He knows offense. He's good with quarterbacks. He's a great people person, and he knows the AFC North. Okay, here we go. We finally found one. A comment that says, "Go Brownies," from Hue Jackson?
Wolverine.
Well, I guess it's understandable after all these years it takes a good actor to feign excitement about yet another Browns coaching change. I happen to like this one. Guys?
Bud, you were there last night. I'm curious, forget about what we saw from Hue Jackson. What do you think of Jimmy Haslam last night? He seemed very, he wasn't the same dynamic Jimmy. He seems like a guy that has failed multiple times.
I agree with you. I thought that I was more interested in looking at the other 2 people up there with Jackson, to tell you the truth. Because, come on, face it, he came off well, but I remember everybody raving about how Mike Pettin won the press conference, right?
Oh, yeah.
Multiple times.
And then he lost 18 of 21. So, I thought it was interesting to see Haslam's demeanor. I thought that one little anecdote about Jackson telling him how successful you've been, Jimmy, and he said, except in this.
Yeah.
I think that's really hit home with him. And I thought the other guy, I was interested in seeing how Sashi Brown came off. And I think it was important that he made a point of it a couple times to say, look, this is Hue Jackson's time, and we'll talk later. But I think he's in that position. Somebody close to the team described him as our Henry Kissinger. Okay? A guy who can walk into a tough situation with warring factions, and bring everybody together and smooth things out. And I really believe that that's why he's there. I don't think he's there to exert authority over the 53-man roster every chance a personnel thing comes up. I think he's there in case things start to move apart, as we've seen him during bad seasons.
He's there for when Hue Jackson says, I want to keep this guy because he's a good special teamer. And the GM says, well, yeah, but that doesn't really work in what we're trying to do. And Sashi's there to kind of say, look, we are going to keep this guy.
Yeah.
And then here's how we're going to appease you as well.
Yeah, and the difference this time is that the guy who they do bring in and call him the GM, whatever they want to title they give him, is going to have no power in the organization other than he's going to recommend talent to these guys. Unlike last time when Ray Farmer and Mike Pettin clearly did not see eye to eye.
And I think the other difference is Hugh's going to have say in who that guy is.
Yeah.
And he understands, look, if I'm going to succeed, chances are he's going to succeed. If he's going to fail, chances are I'm going to fail. So I got to have somebody that I trust, somebody that I'm comfortable with. And I think that's part of the reason why the Browns set up the power structure the way that they did. They empowered the head coach. They feel like that guy is more important. And it's very, very important for that guy to have some say in who the GM or the personnel guy is going to be, because they're going to succeed or fail together.
Really, I just want to have the D. Haslam press conference.
I don't say this often, Chris, but great point.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That's my one for the year.
That's how we'll wrap up Sports Insider right there. Thanks to Mary Kay Cabot, Zack, Meisel, and Chris Haynes for joining us. For Bud Shaw and Chris Fedor, I'm Dan Labbe. Thanks for watching.